All right. Recording. We have sound, it looks like. Maybe I should double check that real quick. Yeah, we have sound. All right. So good evening, everyone. For tonight, what I had planned for us was to complete chapter 8. We have a couple of topics left to discuss. One of them was the exceptions, learn about exceptions, and also there are the continuing break statements that we use with anything else in another situation that you need for your homework as well. We didn't go over them last time, so we'll talk about them as a starting point, go over the exceptions, and then after that you have time to review, and I'll be available to answer questions, and that's the plan for tonight. Start with a screen share. Okay, so we're sharing now. So we start here. Here's an example of how we might use the break statement. Let's try to go through this code and try to understand it line by line. And in the previous section of the class, it seemed beneficial to code it yourself. So you might want to code it yourself and then see how it works. But even before we code it, let's see if we can tell what's happening here. So we're told while true. So that means we're going to keep on doing this. And then we have an int random, which is equal to, who can unpack what is happening here on the right hand side of this assignment?
Getting a random number between 0 and 10.
Okay, yes, and one more thing.
It's being multiplied like that.
Yes. So let me back up. Let's start from something and then we'll expand from here. Now, I guess the reason these are disabled is because now we get to hear every update noise from Microsoft Windows, so it's going to be like that. All right, so math.random, let's start from here. What is that and what do we know about it? And do we need to look it up? And where might we just stop if we need to? Here's what is math.random.
It's a random number between 0 and 1.
It's a pseudo-random generator. It's not the one we used in our homework. We decided to go with the one from the integer class, I believe, right? Oh, sorry, the random class. It was the random class, and we used the one because it goes up to 100 and we took a parameter. But this one will give us a number between 0 inclusive and 1 exclusive. And so we take that and then we multiply it by 10 so we can bring our range to between 0 and 10. And then we also are doing an int because we're casting it to an int because if you look up the documentation, the random is going to return a double. So we're truncating the decimal points. And then we get this number between 0 and 10 printed out. And if so it happens that the random number is 7, we're going to print the variables found exit the loop. And the break statement will allow us to exit the current loop, which in this case is the if. All right. Would you like to practice doing this example real quick? Why don't we just warm up, start the program, and just code up a statement like this one using the break. And that comes up, so the break is going to affect which scope? Well, the scope of the current block that it's in. It's not going to affect anything beyond that. Split yours. More
Much.
much so. More cheerful, yes. Could you have coded this example differently without a break?
Yeah.
How so?
Actually,
By testing the random number in the while part.
You could test the other number in the while part, for example.
true in the wild part.
Well, I was asking how could you have to make some changes. If you're going to not use the break, you'd have to make certain changes. So it is possible, certainly it is possible to use the break. Oops, I forgot to break it. That was a good learning experience. Okay, did this work for you, for everyone? Okay, so if you wanted to get to the end of the loop, you'd use a break. What if you wanted to get back to the top of the loop? You can do so as well by using the continue statement. So the use of the continue statement is when it is encountered in the code, it's going to bring us back to the top of the current loop. In other words, let's take a look here and see what are we doing. So we're doing something 5 times with the for loop, right? We can just simply say we're doing this 5 times. And then we get our random number again. And we say if the random number is greater than 7, we're going to say invalid value and then get back to the top of the loop. In other words, this is a program that only prints numbers between 0 and 7, right? So if your random number is 7, or greater than 7, then it's going to hit continue, and this will bring it back to the top of the loop and try again. If the number is not greater than 7, then we're going to get out of the if loop and then print line the random number, which is part of the for loop, which is why it will do it 5 times. And again, please go ahead and add this as another, maybe comment on the previous example, add this code, and maybe save the file for later use. So do you see the difference between the two then? So for your...
So continue restarts the loop essentially, right?
It's going to go back to restart the loop. That's, yes, the current loop you're in. And for your homework, we haven't talked about exceptions yet, but you're asked to use a break statement to leave the exception when a certain condition happens. So it's going to come in handy to know the break and the continue. It's funny because earlier when I had this running in the other classroom, and a couple of times my randoms were all greater than 7. So we had to change. I just changed it to a lower number so I can get same response. Did we talk in this class how random numbers are seeded? Why we call them pseudo random? We did that. Mike, random. So we talked that the random numbers on the computer are not really truly random. We call them pseudo-random because they essentially have to have what we call a seed to get it started. The seed is a number that you feed it to get it started. And then they use a complex algorithm to generate a random number. But if you give it the same seed, it will result in the same random number, which is not really random because it's started with the same seed and is using the same algorithm. So how do we get around that? By using the timestamp on the operating system down to the millisecond, which varies. And so in that way, you're feeding it a different seed every time. So there's pseudo-random. Fun fact. Any questions? Okay.
So I'm not really getting what the use of the continue statement would be.
Other than it's being used here?
Yeah.
Well, it's I guess I often am asked why we are learning this. I think you need to approach this as a tool that you can add to your toolbox. And, there are other ways you can do this, but sometimes it's very convenient to do something like that. I don't necessarily I would probably one can call this without a continue statement. And I think a lot of people would do so. But now we are learning the continue statement and you have it as a tool available to you. I know that it was funny because we were talking that I guess you were working with someone who liked to use the break statement to get out of the, remember you were just telling me that you were working with someone and they used the break to get out of the if then else?
I guess.
Yeah, you do.
Mhm.
So that, I guess this person liked using it. Just the same way, if you speak English and you know certain words, it doesn't mean you will necessarily use them, right? But it's good to have what my 12-year-old son calls the vernacular.
Only a dream-up scenario where you had to use continuous to make it work, but that would be very complicated to dream up that example.
Yeah, I'm sure you could. I mean, we'll have to spend some time, but I think for the scope of this discussion, I'll say consider it a tool that you can use, and now you know how to use it. And you'll be given the opportunity to practice the break because it's a requirement to use in your homework. So, because I said so.
Yeah, I mean, and the break seems a lot more like something I can see where you would use it, but the continuous seems a little harder to see where it would be.
Yeah, I think there are definitely cases, but you can do it differently. It's a lot of matter of programming style. I guess, Brent, maybe you can speak to that, but I think in some of the older programming techniques,
Yeah,
there's a lot more.
because a lot of
like
people
go-to
used
and-
it like go-tos with labels.
Right.
But it is handy to have like when you use an infinite loop.
Yeah. But in the
Sometimes
past, it was more,
Yeah,
I think, more widely used as a technique. All right, and this brings us to exceptions. So you all have seen exceptions. I think most of us have created a runtime exception, such as this one. That's when you're expecting something to happen and your program crashed when you run it. And this is in this case, it's a number format exception. And that's what they look like, and we really don't want our users to experience those exceptions. It's bad if your user sees an exception like that. So we're going to learn what to do to handle them in a more graceful manner. First of all, what are exceptions? So the exception is there's a class exception, and it's a hierarchy of subclasses that go with the exception class. They all documented in the Java, in the Oracle documentation. And each of the subclasses handles more specific cases. So the exception object is the most generic. In other words, you can think about it this way. If you just catch an exception like that, you catch a lot of different exceptions, but when you're providing user feedback, that would not be very meaningful because all you can tell them is, sorry, but you call an exception happen. But if you know which exception to call from the subclasses, you can give more useful, more specific feedback. For example, the number format exception can, if you catch this exception, then you can give some feedback saying you entered an invalid number. Arithmetic exception, for example, if you try to divide by 0, it would be called, so you just have more of a way, more meaningful feedback to give to the user. And you can give me an example of a null pointer exception. What can you think of one?
you try to access a field or a method and an object that didn't get created properly.
Yeah, that would do it. I was thinking also very common in the array, if you work with arrays, which we haven't here, but I'm sure you all have encountered arrays before. So if you try to access an element in the array that is outside of the length at the moment, that would give you a null pointer exception because again, it's trying to access something that is not there, right? Let me show you the documentation, and also I would like to show you how would you know which exception to catch. You may be wondering by now, how would I know this? Let's see here. So this is, again, as I mentioned, it's a class. It's in the Java lang. And these are the subclasses. So you have a lot of options. And essentially, if your method that you called caused an exception is going to throw what we call throw an exception, and your goal as a programmer is to catch this exception. So that's what happens. You catch the exception, and then you have handled it, and then you're going to take an action. Most likely, you're going to notify the user. And the exceptions we're looking at today are all going to be runtime exceptions. So how would you know which exception to call? Well, the way to do that would be if you're using the Java library, then you can search for, let's see, or better yet, let's say that we're doing the parse int. Let's say we want to get a string and then parse it to an int. And here it is, parses the string argument as a signed decimal number. So we have been using that already. And now the new bit of information is that the documentation is the place where it will tell you which exception was thrown. So here it tells us if we're using parse int, it's going to throw the number format exception. And that's how you would know. And the number format exception is a subclass of exception. They all are. And then also in addition to that, of runtime and illegal argument exception. But if you can catch the lowest subclass, that's the most specific, and that's what you would want to do. So that's, and if you didn't catch it again, you're going to get the stack trace, which will show you the methods that led to the problem. And the last one is the method that you want to start from. So that's your code, and you start looking at, in this app on line 18 to see what the problem is and go from here. And also just to point out here, what caused the exception? Well, because the user entered the $, and that's not handled. We're probably expecting either parse int or a parse double. We're expecting a number, so it doesn't handle the $. So are you clear? I want to make sure that as far as the general approach, you're clear when you're working with the method from the Java library. If you can check if it throws an exception, which exception it throws, and then you can catch this exception. And also I should mention that it's not necessarily always a good idea to catch an exception. Sometimes, in many cases, it's easier to first try to just do an if then else, and then check with the user and then give them some feedback. That's cheaper in terms of performance than using an exception. So try first to do it differently, unless we are exercising right now with it, so we'll be using the exceptions. And here is the syntax. This is how you would write your code. So you try to do something, you're going to try to parse some number from the user, and then you're going to catch an exception, and then you have to give it the type, the exception class, and the name, which is traditionally we use E, and then you handle your statements. So we will do I think it's a very nice actually coding example using an exception in class next, but here's what it would look like. In this line here, you're going to try to get a string and then parse it to a double, and you're going to catch a number format exception. And once you catch it, that's when you can do your handling, such as a valid number, try again, and then you can say continue to bring you to the top of the loop, right? And then you can, so it's like a while loop almost. You ask them again to respond. And in fact, from within the since you're in this code block here, it's a little difficult to come up with a better way than using the continuum, right? I think that's a very good way here in this example. And now instead of the exception, we say invalid number, try again. And because we said continue, if we said break, it would just have gone to the next line of code, right? But we said continue, so it goes back to the top and then asks them to enter a monthly investment. All right, that's all for the lecture. And for the rest of the class, next I'd like us to do a coding example together, which is going to use exceptions among other things. I think it's a very good practice for conditionals, and let's work on this next. So please start your, I guess your Eclipse is already started, so let me start mine. Do you have something open to work with, or should we start a new project? What do you guys prefer?
I just started doing
Okay. Invoice app. We just have one class, so when you're creating the class, use a main.
What did you call the class?
Invoice app. So what this program is going to do is it's going to ask the fictitious customer what type of customer they are, and there's some, three categories, which are just 3 letters, and then based on the customer response, the different types of customer will get different types of discounts. So we're getting a couple levels of conditionals here, among other things. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is declare our scanner. Okay. And we'll do this in one. We could do this as a class, but we'll just do it in one program because the reason is that we're focusing on something else. Otherwise, we'd spend a lot more time. We're focusing on this particular aspect of the problem, which is why we're just doing it in the main. Okay. I think everybody's tired today, and there's a lot of bugs going around, and I think I might be coming down with something. So let's get this stuff done and get out of here as soon as we can. All right. So string. So we have a string choice. Does everyone know the difference between using single and double quotes?
Single is for characters, double is for strings.
Single is for characters, double is for strings. Okay, thank you. And while true. Can you see in the back?
Yeah.
Wow,
pretty well.
that's amazing. We're going to get the user input. Enter customer type. And the choices are R, C, or T. And then we're going to have a customer type, which is a string. And then we ask them for the subtotal. So they'll give us the subtotal, and we will calculate their discount based on their customer type, and then provide them the total after discount. And in this example, we're not going to account for the tax, but if you want to, in case you have no other problems or things you need to learn, you can maybe work in the lab time to add a tax to the total, okay? As an exercise suggestion. All right, so we have a double subtotal.
Can you scroll it now?
Yeah. And now we're going to use our try and catch blocks. So we're going to try to get the next line from the above and convert it to double. And we'll catch a number format exception E. So again, you have to give it the type with the class type. So number format exception and the name E, of the object, I should say. And now we are going to give a user message, a message to the user. And return to the top of the block with a continue. So again, you just need to know what type of exception the method you're using is calling, or is rather throwing, sorry, is throwing. And then you're going to use a try and catch and then catch this exception. And we're not going to talk about it today, but probably, I think we'll have time to get to it. You can also have your own methods throw exceptions. So we'll continue expanding on this topic later. It's not just something that's reserved for the Java library methods, but we will learn how your methods can throw their own exceptions as well. And then you can catch them. Okay, so now the next part of what we are working with here will be to use a switch statement to determine the customer type, which is a perfect structure for switching on a variable customer type in this case. So for doing that, we need to declare a discount % double. And the discount % will be declared outside of the switch. So switch customer type. And customer type was a string, right? And now we have a couple cases here, 3 cases really. The first is R. And we'll say if the subtotal is less than 100, discount % is going to be 0, no discount. Else if, and remember I could use the curly braces, but it's only one line, so I'll not. else if subtotal is, so next one is going to be the subtotal is in the range, the next range, which is greater than or equal to 100 and less than 250. And you can't just remove, you have to use the variable name twice, so this is not going to work. Okay? And so if we're in the range between greater than or equal to 100 and less than 150, our discount percent will be 10%, so 0.1. We represent 10% as 0.1. And if you have any question at any point, I know you guys raise your hands anyway, but just please let me know. And else if the subtotal is greater than or equal to 250 and less than 500, the discount percent will be 25%. Who remembers the meaning of the double ampersand here? It's an and? Yes. And one other thing about it though?
Short circuit.
Short circuit. And what does it mean?
It means if the first one is found false, it doesn't test the second one.
If the first one is sufficient to determine the true or false of the expression, it doesn't go after the second one. I'm repeating you because I'm recording and I know that unless we get a mic here. All right. So and else, if they're making some even bigger purchase than that, we're going to have a discount percent of 0.3. So let's see. I think, let's see. Okay, so hopefully that's not confusing. Is this line confusing? I just didn't use the curly braces, right? Because the else statement doesn't check anything. So if that's confusing, go ahead and add your curly braces, okay?
And again, the reason why it's not necessary.
The only reason why it's not necessary is because we happen to only have one line in each statement. So if I wanted to say discount percent 25 and then I want to system out line something or other, that would not work. Then I would have to use the curly braces because otherwise it wouldn't know the scope, right? The curly braces help us determine the scope. But since we just have one statement, we're not using it. If you want to use it, you certainly can. All right, so I think we are good here with case R. And now what we need to do is we need to break, because if we get case R, we don't want to go in a subsequent case, right? You remember the behavior of the switch is that if we don't break, it's going to continue going through. And then we're going to add our case T for the other customer. And you have to use the columns to remind you.
Can you scroll it?
Yes, sorry. For the case T and C, we'll just do a simple one. We'll just assign it a value. But you certainly can go and create an entire new conditional based on the different amounts, right? So I will just not do it here for the sake of brevity. So let's say if their customer type T, there's some special club or something, so they always get 40% discount. And then we need to break And our last customer is C. They get the discount percent is 0.2, for example. And again, we need to break. And then we have a default, which will conveniently allow us to handle any other. If the user enters any other type, they're going to get 0 discount by this business logic. So 0.0. Okay. And then that's the end of our switch. And here is where we're closing our switch. Okay, the next task we have, so here maybe we should add some more nice comments. We got the user input. Here we determined discount percent. And then our next task will be to calculate the discount amount and the total. So we're working in some company and we're doing the business logic. That's our job for today, right? All right. And so we have a double, and the way this happens is, of course, the manager comes and tells you these are the numbers for this kind of customers, and then your job is to translate that to Java in this case. All right, so we have a double discount amount, which will be, we're going to use the subtotal entered by the user times the discount percent which is determined. And since we declared the discount percent outside of the switch, it updated, on a more global level, and it's available to us here. Is this clear? Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. And then we're going to calculate the total by adding the subtotal and the discount. Sorry, subtracting.
Raise that up so we can see it.
And we're not adding it, but that would be logic. That would be a bad logic error. We're subtracting it. So we subtracted the discount from the subtotal. And now we're going to format and display. We're using the number format. We use it many times. Oops. Get currency instance. And we're also displaying a percent, so we'll get a percent instance as well. And now we'll concatenate our string. So we display the discount percent. Do you guys remember the percent? And then we call the format, and then we pass it the. In this case, which one should we pass? It's pretty obvious, right? So we want to format the discount percent. And then we're going to be adding these new lines. And next we're going to print the discount amount. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to be using double. In JavaScript, you can use either, and here we just need those double, okay? And then the total. I have an error. And the last bit we need is to see if the user wants to continue. Remember this, all this is taking place inside the while loop. So we will ask the user, continue, yes or no. And now, because we know how to use it, we're going to take this opportunity to use the break statement. So we're going to say the choice with equals ignore case is n. They don't want to continue. We're going to close our scanner object and we're going to break. I don't think I have enough. Let's see here. Okay, so there's the while loop. And this is the main, and I need one more. Oh, I have too many, in fact. Oh no, let's see. Okay. Let's run it and see what happens. Okay, who is going to, which customer type? Subtotal? What do you say?
375.
375. Okay, let's see what is the expected. So if it's 375, that's should be a 25% discount, I believe. Yeah, 25% discount, and that leads to a discount amount of $93, leaving for a total of $281.25. And we do want to continue because we want to test our exception handler here, the exception. So I'm going to enter, say T, and sure enough, invalid number, try again. And where is it? Oh, that's strange. Why is it complaining here? Oh, I see. And so if we comment out the exception code, we get the exception. Okay. And if we say no, it just breaks. Do you have any questions on this example? And I want to make sure everybody got it working. Yes, there.
Mine had an error on 158.
Do you want me to look at yours or at mine?
Well, either or, it's just where it says system.out.println discount.
Can you go up? I can't see-
Go up.
Can't see the bottom.
Discount percent. Or was it higher up? Let me take a look at yours now.
But
Because you don't have equal. So equal on
where is that?
it goes right up. This one?
Yeah.
I don't even see it. It's not there. Well, I mean, that's why we're doing this exercise, because we want to try to, you know, by hand coding it helps, and then you can now ask questions. So, let me look at a couple other, think of your questions, and then you just take a look at a couple you should get. Okay, so this was the thing I was telling you not to do.
It's just having it, right?
Not to the other
Well, it
subtotal.
brought up another-
You have to give the variable subtotal again. You can't just say less than, it doesn't understand it like that. So say and, double 1%, right? So you want it to be in the range. So to say this in Java, you say n%, 10%, not int. And 10%, what is the word in English? Is it not 10%? One more, and then you need to say subtotal again. That's right. In the same thing.
And we-
So we don't actually have exception. Oh, 180. 180.
Yeah, because it's supposed to be, this case are.
We did the 6 one. So it should be 30.
Yeah. Because you do.
But it's not giving me the exception.
Okay, so now is the time to work on this and then work through any issues.
I'm not getting an exception.
You're not?
Okay.
So that's, yeah, this will, I think maybe I hit a plus break in it.
Yeah, I was,
Okay, so take a few minutes and work with it.
No
Yeah,
exception.
but are you causing one?
Trying to.
Let's try again. So I enter like X here. But see, you know, I mean, you're not going, if you're handling the exception with a catch, then you're not going to get an exception, which is getting So this is the expected behavior. Guys, if you catch the exception, then it's not going to throw it, and that's what you want. There isn't, you don't want to throw the exception and just comment out the lines with the exception just to show you. So if you want to make it do an exception, comment out line 28, whack whack. Sorry, 29. To try, so that's part of the exception, right? So whack whack there, and whack whack line 32. Well, this is the line that has to run. That's what it assigns to the user. And if the user enters like letters, it's going to cause an exception. So you close the line 33 here. And also comment out the following 4 lines. Now running again, please. Well, you were supposed to test it with strings, so put some letters there. The subtotal is not is the subtotal with is in the subtotal where you're trying to put a string in the number, and that's where it goes. And so I just showed you the exception just to show you what happens, but of course you don't want to have one. Right? But it's good to play with it. Try to make the exception happen because I think it might help you figure out if there is any question about what does what. Please try to make the exception happen if you want. Yes, so guys, so it's the same like when you go shopping on Amazon and then it says your subtotal is $25, and if you're a Prime member, you get 0 for shippings, or you get a 10% discount. So it's the same thing. So they're going to subtract from your total the discount amount, right? If you're finished with this and you feel like you don't have any questions to ask, and you're very clear and solid on the example, you take a quick break. And when you come back, we'll discuss the plan for the midterm review. And I think I will turn off the recording at this point.